The first time my father ever called me scared, I was 31 years old, standing in a parking garage in downtown Memphis, and he said, "Son, I think I need to go to the hospital." Just like that. Calm, measured. The way a man who spent 40 years building houses with his bare hands talks steady, even when the ground is moving under him. That was 29 years ago. He had a kidney stone the size of a small pebble, and they dissolved it in 40 minutes, and he was home by dinner time complaining about the hospital's coffee. But I have never forgotten the way my chest felt when I heard his voice say those words. Like someone reached in and grabbed something vital and just held it there, waiting. My father, Harold Eugene Mercer, was not a man who called for help. He was the kind of man who fixed things, the leaky faucet before you noticed it was leaking, the wobble in your kitchen chair before anyone sat down wrong, the silence in a room before it turned into an argument. He showed up to everything early and left every place a little better than he found it. Not because he needed credit, because that was simply how Harold Mercer moved through the world. He turned 79 last October. A Tuesday. Actually, he told me not to make a fuss, so I made a fuss. I drove down to Clarksville the night before, bought a carrot cake from the bakery on Riverside Drive, because it has been his favorite since before I can remember. And we sat at the kitchen table, in the house he has owned since 1987, and talked until well past 11. He beat me at cribbage twice, told me a story about my grandfather I had never heard before, and walked me to the door the same way he always has, hand on my shoulder. One firm squeeze, drive safe, James. That was 7 weeks ago. I replayed that night in my head 100 times in the days that followed. Not because I knew something was coming. Because when you get to be 63 years old, you start understanding that the ordinary moments are the ones that matter. The carrot cake, the cribbage, the hand on the shoulder. Drive safe, James. Those are the things a man carries. My name is James Mercer. I'm 63 years old. I retired from the county road department 2 years ago after 31 years, and I have spent most of my adult life being the kind of man my father quietly taught me to be, not with speeches, not with lectures, but with example, day after day after day. I coach a men's softball league on Thursday evenings. I bring my neighbor Frank coffee on Saturday mornings because he lost his wife 3 years ago, and sometimes a cup of coffee and someone sitting in the chair across from you is the whole difference. And for 11 years, I was married to a woman named Diane. I want to be careful about how I say what I'm about to say, because I am 63 years old, and I have learned that most things in life don't divide cleanly into heroes and villains. Diane was not a villain. She was a woman who put herself first, every single time, without exception or apology, and who had a gift for making that sound reasonable. I had spent 11 years watching her do it. I had spent 11 years calling it a personality difference. I was wrong about that. I just hadn't gotten there yet. It was a Thursday, February 6th, 5:31 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had just turned my alarm off. I get up at 5:30, I always have, and the phone was already lit up on the nightstand. Dad. He never called before 7 in the morning. Not once, in 63 years. I picked up before the second ring. Dad, James. His voice was different. Not thin, exactly. Compressed. Like a man who is keeping something in check by sheer force of will. I don't want you to worry. When someone says that, you worry. Dad, what's going on? I woke up about an hour ago. My right side has been hurting something awful, and my times he paused, just briefly. I can't seem to get warm, son. I'm sweating, but I can't get warm. I was already sitting up, feet on the floor. Right flank pain, sweating, chills, confusion about temperature. My brain assembled it without my permission. Kidney, infection, stone, something worse. Have you called anyone else? I didn't want to bother. Dad. I said it the same way he used to say my name. When I was about to make a decision he could already see was wrong. Stop. I'm coming. James. I'm coming. Don't move around. Unlock the back door and sit down in the kitchen. Can you do that? A short pause. Yes. I'll call you back in 5 minutes. I love you. I love you too, son. I hung up and sat there for exactly 2 seconds. My truck, a 2020 F-150, was sitting in the parking bay at Denton's garage on Route 41W, transmission issue. They'd called Wednesday afternoon wouldn't be ready until Friday, maybe Saturday. I had known this. I had borrowed Diane's car twice this week already to run errands, and each time she had made a small, precise comment about her schedule that landed like a thumb pressed into a bruise. Diane's Lexus was in the driveway, full tank. She'd mentioned filling it up Sunday. Diane was asleep beside me, exactly as she had been every morning for 11 years on her side, back to me, completely still. Diane slept like a person, with no unresolved business. I had always somewhat admired that about her. I touched her shoulder. Diane. Nothing. Diane. She made a sound, not quite a word, that meant this better matter. My dad called. He's sick, right flank pain, chills, sweating. I need to get him to Vanderbilt. Can I take your car? She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone waking up fully. The quiet of someone who was already awake enough to be calculating. How bad is it? Bad enough that he called me at 5 in the morning. He never calls at 5 in the morning. She rolled to her back, stared at the ceiling. Can't you call an ambulance? Now, I want to stop right here, because I know what some of you are thinking, and you are right to think it. An ambulance was the sensible answer. But here is what you need to understand about Harold Mercer. 18 months ago, he had a bad fall in the driveway, and the ambulance that came took 47 minutes to arrive, and then transported him to a hospital 40 minutes farther than Vanderbilt because of some routing issue with the dispatch. He sat in a hallway on a gurney for 6 hours. He told me afterward, quietly and without drama, that he would rather crawl to the hospital himself than go through that again. That was not stubbornness. That was a man who had survived long enough to understand that the system is not always on your side. I told Diane all of this in about 30 seconds. Clear, fast, no embellishment. She was quiet again. Then she said, James, I have the Henderson presentation at 9 o'clock. It took me 2 weeks to put together. I cannot be sitting in a hospital waiting room all morning. I looked at her. I'm not asking you to come. I'm asking to borrow your car. And if something happens to it, something cold moved through me right then, not anger. Something quieter than anger. The kind of feeling that arrives when something you have suspected for a long time becomes something you actually know. Diane, I'm not trying to be difficult. She sat up, pulled her robe off the bedpost, put it on with the efficiency of a woman who had made her decision and was now just managing the conversation. Call Frank. Call a rideshare. There are options, James. I'm not your only option. She went to the bathroom. The door didn't lock behind her, it never did, but it closed with a soft, complete click that somehow communicated more than a slam ever could. I sat on the edge of the bed for 3 seconds. 3 seconds exactly. Then I picked up my phone. Frank Delgado is 68 years old. He lives directly across the street. He drove a school bus for 22 years and still moves with the deliberate calm of a man who once had 37 children's lives in his hands every single morning and took that responsibility seriously. He lost his wife, Rita, to breast cancer in 2022. He has never once, not once, made me feel like showing up for him was an inconvenience. I called him at 5:38 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring. James? Frank, I'm sorry to call this early. My dad's sick, right flank pain, sweating. He called me at 5 a.m. My truck's at Denton's. Is there any chance? Give me 4 minutes. That was it. No, let me check my schedule. No, how long will this take? 4 minutes. Like the man had been waiting by the door. I called Dad back. I'm on my way. Frank is driving. You don't need to do a thing. Just stay in the kitchen and keep that back door unlocked. Frank Delgado? Yeah. A small sound, almost a breath of relief. He's a good man. He is, Dad. He really is. I went downstairs, grabbed my jacket and my wallet. Diane was in the kitchen when I passed through. She was making coffee. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. There was nothing useful left to say. Frank pulled up at 5:43. I counted the minutes. He was in his coat, his good boots, hair combed. At 5:43 in the morning, for someone he had never met, he combed his hair. The drive to Clarksville took 22 minutes. We found Dad exactly where I had told him to be, sitting at the kitchen table in his flannel robe, hands wrapped around a glass of water, jaw set tight the way it gets when he is managing something painful and doesn't want to make a production of it. He looked up when I came in and something moved across his face that was not quite relief and not quite gratitude, something older and quieter than both of those things. "You came fast," he said. I drove as fast as Frank would let me. Frank, from the doorway. "I drove exactly the speed limit, Harold." Dad almost smiled. "Good man." We got him into the back of Frank's Buick and made it to Vanderbilt Medical Center in 31 minutes. A nurse named Terrell Steady Hands, quiet voice. The kind of competence that announces itself without performance got Dad into a room in under 20 minutes. The attending physician, a doctor, Anita Voss, was direct and unhurried in the specific way that good doctors are. She ordered a CT scan and blood work within the first 15 minutes. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "the symptoms you're describing are consistent with a kidney infection that may have progressed. We're going to find out exactly what we're dealing with." Dad looked at her with the clear eyes of a man who has lived long enough to trust competence when he sees it. "Whatever you need," he said. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Plastic chair, fluorescent light that buzzed just slightly off a frequency human ears can process comfortably. A television in the corner, cycling through morning news on mute. Frank sat beside me the entire time, drinking bad coffee from a machine down the hall, occasionally talking about baseball or nothing, occasionally saying nothing at all. Diane sent one text at 8:47 a.m. "How is he?" 2.5 hours after I drove away from a house where she was standing in the kitchen making coffee, she sent 4 words. I looked at it for a moment. Then I put my phone back in my pocket. At 8:53, Dr. Voss came to find me. Her face was measured, the expression of a physician who has learned to communicate both seriousness and control simultaneously. "Your father has a kidney infection that has become fairly aggressive, what we call pyelonephritis. It's serious, Mr. Mercer, but we caught it at the right time. We're going to admit him, start him on IV antibiotics, and monitor his kidney function closely. With the right treatment, men his age can come through this well." She paused. "But he needed to be here. He was right to call you when he did. Is he stable?" "He's stable. He's also asking if the TV in his room gets the History Channel." Frank laughed out loud. "The real kind." "That's him," I said. I called back to Dad's room before going in. He picked up on the second ring, which told me his hands were steadier. "They're letting me in. Bring me something decent to read from the gift shop," he said. "All they've got in here is magazines about people I've never heard of." I went to the gift shop. I bought him a large print crossword book, a bag of the peanut butter crackers he has eaten his entire life, and a spiral notebook because Harold Mercer always has a notebook nearby and I didn't know if he'd thought to bring one. When I walked into his room, he was sitting up against the pillow, IV in his left arm, monitors doing their quiet work, and he looked like a man who had weathered the worst of it and was ready to get on with things. He looked at the crossword book and the crackers, and something in his face that he would never put into words moved right past his eyes before he controlled it. "You remembered the crackers." "I always remember the crackers, Dad." We sat for a while. The afternoon came in through the window at a low angle, that particular flat winter light that makes everything look like an old photograph. We talked about small things: Frank's patience, Dr. Voss's competence, the terrible hospital coffee that I drank anyway because sitting there with him in that room was exactly where I wanted to be and I would drink whatever it took to stay. At some point, without making a ceremony of it, he set the crossword book down and looked at me. Diane didn't come. It was not a question. Harold Mercer had never once in his life wasted a question on something he already knew the answer to. "She had a presentation," I said. He nodded slowly. "Just once." His eyes moved to the window, to that flat winter light over the Vanderbilt campus rooftops, and I watched something happen in his expression that was not anger, not surprise, not grief, something that looked more like a man quietly closing a door he had been leaving open for a long time. "She has had a lot of presentations," he said. The weight of that was enormous. "Simple as it was, Dad. James." He looked back at me. His eyes were completely steady, completely clear. "I am not asking you to do anything tonight. I am not asking you to make any decisions. I'm just telling you that I see your life. I have been seeing it for a while now." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. "You are a man who shows up," he said. "Every time, without being asked, without conditions, without keeping a tab. You are my son, and you are that kind of man, and you got it the same way. You got everything else you watched and you practiced and you chose it every day. He picked the notebook up off the bedside table, the one I had just brought him, and held it for a moment. A man like that deserves someone standing next to him, he said, not someone waiting at home to see what was complicated about it. The room was absolutely quiet. Outside, somewhere down the hall, a cart wheeled past. A monitor in the corner beeped once, steadily, doing its work. My throat was tight in a way I hadn't let it be in years. Yeah, I said, and my voice came out rough and completely honest. I know, Dad. He nodded once, slowly, like that was the answer he needed. Then he set the notebook down, opened the crackers, and offered me one. In the morning, he said, I want to call Martin Okafor. Martin Okafor, attorney, Clarksville and Nashville, 26 years in practice. He had handled my mother's estate when she passed in 2018. Sharp, precise, not a man to waste a sentence. I kept my voice careful. Okay. I've been thinking about my documents, Dad said, and I've decided they no longer reflect what I intend. He looked at me over the cracker bag with the expression of a man who has arrived at a conclusion and is not interested in relitigating the path. I want them to reflect what I intend. Dad, you don't have to. James Harold Mercer, full name, all three. I had not heard all three since I was 19 and came home from a party making promises my coordination could not keep. Do not tell me what I have to do. I closed my mouth. He settled back against the pillow. I built something, he said quietly. Your mother and I built something together over 41 years. We went without things. We made choices. We put away what we could because we wanted it to mean something after we were gone. He paused. It is going to mean something to people who showed up. I stayed until 7 that evening. Frank drove me home. We rode mostly in silence, the good kind, old country station low on the radio, the Clarksville lights coming on through the windows as the evening settled. There is a friendship that does not need maintenance to function, that does not require explanation or apology or performance. Frank and I had that. I thought about how rare it was and felt grateful in a way that had weight to it. Everything going to be okay? Frank asked, pulling onto my street. Yeah, I said. I think everything is going to be exactly what it's supposed to be. He nodded. That was enough. Diane was in the living room when I got in. She looked up from her laptop, read my face the way a person reads a weather forecast, processing, calculating. She closed the laptop. How is he? Kidney infection. Serious one. They've got him on IV antibiotics. He should be home in a few days. She exhaled. I'm glad he's okay. He's okay because I got him there. The room went quiet. Diane was careful. She had always been careful with words. It was one of the things that had attracted me to her, once, that precision. But precision cuts both ways. James, I want to explain about this morning. You don't have to. I want to. She stood up. The Henderson presentation was, it's been 3 months of work. It was not a small thing. Neither was my father's kidney. I know that. I know that. And I'm not saying. She stopped, composed herself. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more controlled. And underneath the control was something I had not heard in it before. Something that sounded like a woman beginning to understand the shape of what she'd done. I just need you to know that if I had understood how serious you understood, I said. I told you. Right flank pain, sweating, chills at 5 in the morning. I told you everything you needed to know. She looked at me. You decided, I said. Not with anger. Not with the hot rush of a man who just reached his limit. With the quiet, complete steadiness of a man who had finally, after a very long time, simply stopped pretending. You heard everything I said and you made a decision. That's okay, Diane. You're allowed to make decisions. So is he. Something shifted in her face. What does that mean? Martin Okafor is going to his room tomorrow morning. She was still for a moment. His attorney. Yes. The color changed in her face. Slowly. The way ice changes when the temperature shifts. Not all at once, but undeniably. James. Dad built that house in 1987, I said. He and my mother paid it off in 2003. He has been driving the same truck for 12 years because he was saving. The savings account, the CDs, the property on Route 12 he bought in 2001 and has been letting sit. He built all of that the same way he built everything else, slowly, carefully, without making noise about it. I picked up my keys from the table by the door. He gets to decide where it goes, I said. Just like you got to decide where you were this morning. You're going back there? I'm going back tomorrow morning. I'm taking him the newspaper and the good coffee from the place on Main because the hospital coffee is criminal, and I'm going to sit with him while Martin Okafor comes. And then I'm going to help bring him home when they release him. I put my hand on the door. That's what I'm going to do. And us? I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the bedside table where I had touched her shoulder at 5:31 in the morning. I thought about call Frank, call a rideshare. There are options. I thought about a text at 8:47 that said, "How is he?" sent 2.5 hours after she went back to sleep. I thought about my father sitting in that kitchen in his flannel robe, managing something painful, waiting for me to come. I'll be at Frank's tonight, I said. I think we both need some time to sit with this honestly. I did not slam the door. I closed it quietly behind me, stepped out onto the front porch, and breathed in the February air, cold and clean and completely straight with me, in a way that almost nothing had been for a very long time. Frank answered before I finished knocking. I figured, he said simply, and stepped back to let me in. Martin Okafor arrived at the hospital the following morning, at 10 o'clock, charcoal coat, leather portfolio, the handshake of a man who understood that the weight of a room was something you carried in, not something you picked up when you got there. He sat across from my father, yellow legal pad on his knee, and the two of them talked for 51 minutes while I sat in the corner, still as I've ever been, a witness to something that deserved to be witnessed. When Martin Okafor stood to leave, the documents that Diane had believed were a certainty for 11 years of marriage had been rewritten completely, precisely, and permanently. The house on Greenfield Road, James. The savings, James. The property on Route 12, James. The 1,974 Ford pickup that had been my grandfather's, that my father had restored over 7 years in the garage, that still ran perfect and smelled like him when you opened the door on a warm day, James. And $15,000 to the Veterans Resource Center on Craft Street, because Harold Mercer had volunteered there every second and fourth Monday for 9 years, because that is exactly the kind of man he was and always had been. Diane's name appeared 0 times. She had called me 11 times before 10 o'clock that morning. I read the notifications while Martin Okafor was walking to the elevator, and I put my phone back in my pocket, and I went back to my father's room. He was opening a fresh page in the spiral notebook. "What are you writing?" I asked. "Letter to the Veterans Center," he said. "Want to give them some context about what the money's for." I sat down. I watched him write for a moment. His handwriting was still the same as it had been my entire life, deliberate and clear. "Dad. Thank you." He kept writing. "Don't thank me. I did what was right. That's all any of us can do." He brought him home 3 days later. I was there for every one of them. I brought the newspaper and the good coffee and a second crossword book when he finished the first one. I sat with him through the evenings and left when he wanted quiet and came back when he needed company. And somewhere in those 3 days, in the specific, unhurried rhythm of a man taking care of his father, I felt something in me unknot that I hadn't fully known was bound. On the last morning, before the discharge nurse came in with the paperwork, Dad took my hand across the blanket. His grip was steady, stronger than it had been Thursday morning when all of this started. "You know what I noticed about you this week?" he said. "What's that? You never once complained." He looked at me with those clear, direct eyes that I had been reading my whole life, and that still, somehow, told me things I needed to hear. Not about the truck being in the shop. Not about Frank having to drive you everywhere. Not about any of it. You just moved. I learned that from somebody. He squeezed my hand once. Let it go. Picked up his crossword. "Drive safe, James," he said. I stood in the doorway of that hospital room for just a moment before I stepped out. Just one moment. Looking at this man 79 years old, flannel robe over the hospital gown because he had discharged the hospital gown on day 2, crossword book open, reading glasses on the end of his nose, completely and utterly himself. and I thought about everything he had quietly given me over 63 years. Not money, not property, not anything that could be revised in a document. The knowledge of how to show up. I drove him home to Greenfield Road, got him settled in his kitchen with his tea the specific kind, steeped the exact number of minutes he had told me once and I had never forgotten, checked his medications, checked the thermostat, made sure the phone was charged and within reach. He told me to stop fussing. I fussed for another 10 minutes. On the porch, before I left, he put his hand on my shoulder, one firm squeeze. I drove back toward Nashville, in the late afternoon light. Frank's guest room was quiet and warm and asked nothing of me. Diane had sent 23 messages. I read them all, sitting in Frank's driveway, in the truck, one hand on the wheel, engine idling. I read them all. I thought about what I had said to her, and what she had said to me, and what 5:31 in the morning reveals about a person that 11 years of regular living somehow never quite does. I called my attorney the following Monday. I am not going to dress that up, or make it more dramatic than it was. It was simply the next right thing, the same way every right thing in my life has been quiet, clear, and long overdue. Some people come into your life and show you exactly who they are, and some people stay in your life long past the moment you understood what they showed you. The difference between those two things is the work. My father taught me that, not in a speech, not in a lesson. In 40 years of watching him show up for my mother, for me, for strangers at the Veterans Center on Craft Street who needed someone to sit with them and not make it feel like charity. You want to know the legacy of a life well lived? It is not the house. It is not the savings. It is not the 1,974 Ford that still turns heads on a clear day. It is a son who knows how to move when the phone rings at 5:31 in the morning, without hesitation, without conditions, without counting the cost. That is what my father built. And if I am lucky, if I spend the rest of the years I have left doing even half of it as well as he has, I will have built something worth passing on too. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're with us, because there are more stories where this one came from. Stories about the people who show up and the ones who don't, and what the difference costs. I'll see you on the next one. The people who show up for you without being asked, the ones who answer at 5 in the morning, who comb their hair at 5:43 for someone they've never met, who sit beside you in a plastic chair drinking bad coffee and asking nothing in return. Those are the ones worth building your life around. Pay attention to who moves when it matters. And make sure, when someone needs you, that you are the kind of person who moves too. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of entertainment while leaving behind something a little warmer, a reminder that showing up, in the quiet and unglamorous ways, is one of the most powerful things a person can do.